She wasn't supposed to be here. Glenna knew that the moment the doors closed behind her and the sound followed, music rising, guests turning, order taking control of the room without her consent. Her chest tightened before her thoughts caught up. She stood because everyone else stood, not because she understood what was happening. Her feet felt heavier than they should have. Her son's fingers wrapped firmly around her left hand. On her right, her daughter leaned closer, instinctively aware that something had shifted. The ceremony continued. Faces smiled. Attention flowed toward the front. Glenna remained present in body only. Manuel Reichert stood at the altar, composed, polished, expected to be joyful. He hadn't noticed her yet. That almost made it worse. The world narrowed. Sounds dulled. Motion lost its urgency. Glenna was no longer watching a wedding. She was bracing for recognition. Her daughter squeezed her hand once. Her son didn't look away from the altar. Children often sense truth before adults name it. This place, this man, this timing. None of it aligned, and yet it had arrived anyway. Manuel's eyes lifted, briefly, accidentally, and landed on hers. That was enough. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. His face held still, as if a thought had collided with him mid-step. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't confusion. This was a life he once lived standing in front of him, breathing. Glenna understood then. Nothing hidden stays hidden forever. Some truths wait for rooms full of witnesses. Her son leaned closer. Her daughter's hand stayed firm. They were steady. She needed to be too. The officiant spoke. Guests listened. Promises edged closer. And yet something unspoken had already interrupted everything. What happens when a love-believed finish shows up unfinished and refuses to stay quiet? A place for stories rooted in truth, shaped by real choices and told with purpose. If that's the kind of story you value, consider subscribing and walk with us through this one. Because before this ceremony ends, before a single vow is completed, honesty will claim the room. And no one will leave unchanged. Glenna Walsh had learned early that being noticed was not the same as being valued. So she chose the second and stopped chasing the first. She was the kind of woman people spoke over without realizing it, not because she lacked substance, but because she didn't compete for space. She listened when others rushed to be heard. She waited. She observed. She remembered details most people missed. And somehow, life kept moving forward under her feet without ever pausing to acknowledge how much weight she carried quietly. She built her life without spectacle. No dramatic reinventions, no public declarations, just steady choices made day after day, rooted in responsibility and care. Work came first because it had to. Stability mattered, not luxury, not recognition, just enough certainty that her children could sleep without worry and wake without fear. She was dependable in ways people rarely applauded, showing up early, finishing what others abandoned, holding things together when no one thought about what kept them intact. Motherhood didn't soften her, it clarified her. Raising a son and a daughter meant balance was non-negotiable. One watched the world carefully before speaking. The other spoke freely but felt deeply. Glenna didn't try to shape them into versions she preferred. She paid attention instead, allowing who they were to form naturally while making sure they felt safe enough to become themselves. She taught them consistency before confidence, truth before comfort, and that dignity didn't need an audience. There were moments, quiet ones, when exhaustion rose heavy in her chest. Nights when silence lingered longer than she wanted it to. But she didn't frame her life as sacrifice. She framed it as choice, and choices, she believed, were only regrettable when made against one's values. People assumed she was simple. They were wrong. She understood complexity. She just didn't dramatize it. Love to her wasn't urgency. It wasn't noise. It wasn't promises spoken for effect. Love was follow-through. It was accountability when no one was watching, and it was knowing when to speak and when not to. That understanding shaped everything she did, including how she carried a past that never asked to be forgotten. Because long before the invitation arrived, long before the wedding seats and formal music, Glenna had already learned how easy it was for the world to overlook a woman who refused to announce her strength, and how dangerous that mistake could be. Manuel Reichert did not have to introduce himself. The world did that for him. His name carried weight before he entered a room. People straightened when he spoke. Meetings shifted direction with a single glance from him. Success had wrapped itself around his identity so completely that few remembered there was a man inside it. To the public, Manuel was certainty. Every headline reinforced it. Every achievement added to the myth. Visionary thinker, decisive leader, the kind of man whose confidence felt inherited rather than learned. But confidence, when cornered, reveals its cracks. In private moments, rare and brief, Manuel felt the absence he never named aloud. Not loneliness exactly. More like a silence that followed him even when surrounded by people who applauded his presence, but never stayed long enough to know him. He didn't doubt his intelligence. He doubted his permanence. Relationships came easily at first and faded just as quickly. People admired him more than they understood him, and admiration, he learned, could fill rooms but not homes. Work offered clarity where feelings did not. While emotions demanded patience, strategy delivered certainty. While people disappointed, systems behaved. So he built an empire that answered when he called, trusted figures he could measure, and made decisions where outcomes obeyed logic. Yet something remained unresolved. Success asked everything of him, his time, his presence, his attention, and returned praise instead of peace. And though he rarely admitted it, there were nights when achievement felt like motion without direction. Manuel told himself this was the price of influence, that fulfillment would arrive once the next goal was reached. It never did. When he spoke about family, his words were polished, controlled, as if spoken from a distance rather than experience. He knew how to describe connection, even if he struggled to remain inside it. The truth was simple and inconvenient. He had mastered leadership everywhere, except where it mattered most, and while the world celebrated his direction, very few saw the cost, how ambition had trained him to postpone life, believing he could return to it later intact. Later is a promise success makes often. It keeps that promise rarely. Manuel Record stood admired, respected, envied, and quietly unsure of what would remain when the applause no longer followed him home. He didn't know then that the life he thought he'd outgrown was the one waiting patiently to remind him what he had traded. They met by accident, though neither of them believed that afterward. The charity event was already behind schedule when Glenna arrived, sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows, clipboard tucked close to her side. She moved through the room with quiet efficiency, correcting problems before anyone raised their voice, redirecting confusion before it grew teeth. Manuel had attended hundreds of events like this. He usually blended into the background until someone needed him to stand in the foreground. That night, he was watching without intention, half listening, waiting for obligation to be fulfilled. Then he noticed her, not because she sought attention, but because the room steadied wherever she stood. When something went wrong, it resolved itself near her presence. When tension rose, it lowered when she spoke. "You're running this like it matters," Manuel said, stepping beside her. Glenna didn't look up right away. "It does," she replied. "When people stop paying attention, things fall apart." He smiled, slight but genuine. "So do people." That caught her attention. She looked at him then, not impressed, not uncertain, just present. She didn't rush to fill the pause either. That, more than anything, stayed with him. They spoke briefly, about logistics at first, then less safely. Work led to values. Values drifted into belief. Neither asked what the other did for a living. Neither needed to. Manuel felt it before understanding it. Relief, not excitement. Relief, as if something inside him had been allowed to exhale. Glenna sensed it too, though she wouldn't name it yet. She recognized the expression he wore because she had worn it herself, someone tired of being admired without being known. When they parted that evening, there were no promises, no plans, just an awareness that the conversation had ended too soon. Days later, a message arrived. Simple, direct, coffee, no expectations. Glenna agreed. Neither of them could explain why, but both understood that something ordinary on the surface had already shifted beneath them, and neither had walked away unchanged. What grew between them did not announce itself. There were no dramatic moments, no immediate claims, just consistency. Coffee stretched into dinners. Dinners became walks that lasted longer than planned. Conversations shifted from polite to personal without effort. Manuel noticed the ease first. With Glenna, words didn't need shaping. He didn't feel the pressure to perform clarity or certainty. He could pause, reconsider, admit doubt. She didn't mistake that for weakness. Glenna noticed something else. He listened, not as a habit, but with intention. And when he spoke, he didn't rush to impress. There was carefulness in him, an awareness you recognized from people who had learned to guard their thoughts because they were rarely understood. One evening, standing beneath a quiet stretch of city lights, Manuel said what usually stayed contained. "With everything I've built," he said, his voice steady but unguarded, "I've never felt settled." Glenna didn't respond immediately. "Then you've been collecting success," she replied, "not building a life." That exchange changed the shape of things. From then on, their connection rested on honesty. They spoke about fears without framing them as temporary, about childhood without rewriting it, about ambition without pretending it didn't cost anything. Love arrived without urgency. It didn't demand time. It respected it, and in that restraint, it grew stronger. Glenna didn't admire his status. She questioned his choices. Manuel didn't rescue her. He respected her independence. They learned each other without instruction. Learned where silence meant comfort and where it meant distance. Learned what to touch and what to protect. What bound them wasn't passion. It was recognition. By the time either of them admitted the word love, it no longer needed to be proven. It had already settled into their routines, shaped their expectations, and adjusted their sense of what was possible. They didn't promise permanence. They promised effort. And at the time, that felt like enough. The news arrived quietly. Glenna stood in her kitchen, hands resting on the counter, letting certainty replace hesitation. There was no panic, only the awareness that life had made a decision alongside her. When she told Manuel, he didn't respond right away. His breath caught first. His thoughts followed. "Twins?" he asked after the doctor explained. Glenna nodded. She waited, not for reassurance, but for truth. He sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. "Then we learn," he said. "All of it. Together." Their son was born minutes before their daughter. One arrived observant and composed. The other arrived certain, already demanding space. They were different immediately, and inseparable just as fast. Manuel adjusted in ways he hadn't expected. He learned rhythms that didn't appear on calendars. Learned patience without negotiation. He watched Glenna navigate nights without complaint and mornings without hesitation. For a while, their life aligned. He carried his children without checking time. She trusted the steadiness he showed at home. They moved as a unit, imperfect, present, intentional. Family, it turned out, did not weaken him. It gave shape to everything else. But ambition doesn't retreat easily. Even as laughter settled into their home, schedules tightened. Calls interrupted dinner. Messages arrived before dawn. Manuel told himself it was temporary. Glenna heard the assumption before the explanation. Madison, no, their son, began watching the door instinctively when it opened late. Their daughter learned early how to fill silences with questions. Glenna noticed both. One evening, as Manuel closed his laptop, she spoke without accusation. "They don't need excellence," she said. "They need you." He rubbed his face, tired. "I'm doing this for them." She met his eyes. "No," she said calmly. "You're doing it instead of them." The word stayed after the conversation ended, and something that once felt balanced began shifting its weight. Distance did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated. At first, it showed up as small substitutions. An assistant sent instead of a call, a message instead of a conversation, a promise made to be honored later. Manuel still believed he was present because he remained reachable. Glenna knew better. Their son began to ask questions that didn't expect answers. Their daughter started narrating moments aloud, as if trying to keep them from slipping past unnoticed. Both adjusted without complaint. That worried Glenna more than resistance would have. Manuel's days expanded, his nights shortened. Even at home, his attention remained divided, his thoughts still crossing meetings long completed. He was physically there but mentally delayed, as though arrival always lagged behind intention. One evening Glenna watched him sit with the children, eyes alert but distant. He laughed at the right moments, responded at the right times, and missed what mattered in between. "This can't be the version that stays," she said later, when the house was quiet. He didn't look up immediately. "It's just a phase," he replied. Growth demands it. Everything demands something, she said. That doesn't mean it should be given. Their conversations shifted after that. Less curiosity, more justification. He spoke in outcomes, she spoke in presence. Neither was wrong. But they were no longer speaking the same language. Manuel believed sacrifice was noble when framed as responsibility. Glenna saw how often responsibility blurred into avoidance. The children felt the change before either parent admitted it. Their son grew observant, measuring tone and timing. Their daughter compensated, trying to hold attention through energy instead of need. Glenna began carrying more alone, not out of resentment but necessity. She adjusted routines, filled gaps, protected consistency. Manuel noticed, but not fully. He assumed devotion could compensate for absence, that intention could stand in for attention, that love remained singular, untouched, even when spread thin. It was Glenna who finally said what neither of them could keep deferring. "This isn't about ambition," she told him quietly. "It's about what we're teaching them to expect." He had no immediate answer, and in that silence, something essential lost its footing. The end did not announce itself with raised voices or shattered restraint. It arrived the way many real endings do, through clarity. Glenna reached it first, not in anger, not in sorrow, in recognition. There came a week when Manuel was home every night and still absent from every moment that mattered. He asked the right questions and missed the answers. He listened long enough to respond, not long enough to understand. When the children spoke, he smiled. When they stopped speaking, he didn't notice. Glenna did. She paid attention to the silence that followed him, to how their son folded inward when expectations went unmet, to how their daughter filled conversations with brightness, desperate to keep connection from thinning. None of this felt dramatic. That was the problem. One evening, after the children were asleep, Glenna sat across from Manuel at the kitchen table. No anger stood between them, only facts. "This isn't working," she said. He looked up, startled more by the calm than the statement itself. "It can," he replied quickly. "We just need to realign." She shook her head once. "We've been realigning for years." He reached for logic. "This phase is demanding, you know that. Everything else is stable." "It looks stable," she corrected. "It isn't." He paused. For a moment it seemed like protest might follow. Instead, something else surfaced. "So this is it?" he asked. "We decide love wasn't enough." Glenna didn't answer immediately. "Love isn't what failed," she said. "Priorities did." The words unsettled him because they didn't accuse. They didn't spare either. He began listing solutions, adjusted schedules, new boundaries, future availability promised with confidence. Each suggestion sounded correct in theory. None addressed the present. "We're teaching them something," Glenna continued, "that people they care about can say they'll be there and still not be." Manuel leaned back, exhaling slowly. For once he had no counter. "But I've provided," he said finally. "You've ensured comfort," she replied. "That's not the same thing." The children didn't witness the decision being made. They felt it instead, through subtle changes, through conversations spoken more carefully than usual, through shifts in routine that tried to soften what words would later confirm. Glenna packed deliberately, not everything, just what continuity required. She wanted their lives to feel intact, even if altered. Photos, bedtime books, familiar pillows, small details that told a story of permanence rather than departure. Manuel watched without interruption. Occasionally he offered to help. She declined kindly. This part, she understood, needed to belong to her. The goodbye itself was brief. He paused at the door, unsure what language applied. Apology felt incomplete. Assurance felt dishonest. "If something changes," he said slowly, "would you consider—" She met his expression without tension. "If something changes," she replied, "we'll know it didn't happen by accident." That was when it settled for him, not as loss, but as consequence. The children asked questions once. Glenna answered honestly and sparingly. She didn't assign blame. She framed reality. "Your father loves you," she said, "and he's learning things a long way." Their son accepted this with measured understanding. Their daughter pressed her lips together, processing what adults often take longer to admit, that love could exist alongside distance. Manuel remained present in their lives, financially consistent, logistically reliable. He attended what he could and replaced what he missed. He believed these efforts mattered. They did, but not in the way he hoped. Glenna's life adjusted quickly. Responsibility sharpened instead of breaking her. Without negotiating expectations, she built structure around what she knew how to sustain. And something unexpected happened. Peace arrived. Not happiness, not relief. Peace. The kind that settled in the absence of waiting. The kind that arrived when explanations stopped being rehearsed internally. When disappointment no longer needed translation. She didn't celebrate the separation. She accepted it, and she did so without turning Manuel into a lesson or a warning. The children weren't taught to resent him. They were taught to understand limits without internalizing them. Years passed this way. Manuel rose higher publicly. His accomplishments multiplied. But something essential remained unresolved. He saw it in the children's eyes when conversations stayed surface level, in how they respected him but leaned toward their mother instinctively. He admired that steadiness even as it reminded him what he could not replicate. Glenna never spoke poorly of him. She didn't need to. The contrast spoke for itself. She built a life defined by reliability rather than promise. Her home became predictable in the best sense of the word. The children thrived in the absence of confusion. And yet, nothing truly ended, because life rarely closes chapters with finality. It waits, it layers, it reintroduces, and the truth both of them avoided naming was simple. Distance hadn't erased what they shared. It had simply protected it from further damage. For now, time did what drama never could. It clarified. Glenna learned quickly that raising children without constant explanation required discipline with herself first. She didn't fill the house with commentary about decisions already made. She filled it with routine, presence, and expectation. Mornings moved efficiently. Evenings ended predictably, not rigidly, intentionally. Their son grew into quiet awareness. He absorbed information before reacting to it. When he spoke, he chose his words carefully, as if aware that language was something earned rather than spent. Their daughter differed. She asked questions openly, tested ideas aloud. She engaged the world directly, unafraid to be heard, unafraid to be corrected. Glenna paid attention to both. She never compared them. She adjusted. Homework was handled at the table, not rushed past. Meals were shared without screens. Weathered days ended with conversation, even when no one felt like talking. Especially then. Manuel remained part of their lives in practical ways. He never disappeared. Flights were arranged, school fees covered, birthdays acknowledged with generosity, visits planned between obligations he rarely pretended to escape. The children understood his importance. They also understood his limits. Their son asked once, years after the separation, "Why does Dad try so hard when he's here?" Glenna didn't shield the truth. "Because effort matters to him," she said. "Consistency is what matters to us." Her daughter noticed patterns sooner. "He's always busy even when he's not working," she observed. Glenna smiled softly at the accuracy. Some people live in their thoughts instead of their moments. Neither child responded emotionally. They processed, accepted, adjusted. That was Glenna's quiet success. She didn't raise children who demanded what couldn't be given. She raised children who understood what to value. At work, Glenna advanced steadily, not because she asserted dominance, but because she delivered reliability. When others spoke confidently, she spoke clearly. When others rushed, she verified. Her reputation grew shape rather than volume. People trusted her judgment even if they overlooked her presence initially. Once they noticed, it was difficult to dismiss. She lived carefully, not cautiously. Then the invitation arrived. Manuel Reichert's second wedding ceremony. The weight of it surprised her. She did not feel jealousy. That emotion had already run its course years earlier. What unsettled her was recognition, how unfinished things could resurface without invitation. She sat with the envelope longer than necessary. The children watched her without asking questions. Her daughter broke the silence first. "Are we going?" Glenna nodded. "If you want to." Her son hesitated. "Will it be strange?" "Yes," Glenna said honestly, "but strange doesn't always mean wrong." Neither child resisted. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, something shifted subtly. Conversations became more reflective, not anxious, aware. Manuel reached out more than usual, asked how they were, asked what they needed. His tone stayed respectful, controlled, almost careful. One evening he asked to meet privately. They chose neutrality, a public place with enough quiet to speak freely. He looked older, not visibly, but in the way people do once they stop running from mistruths. "I wanted to see you," he said, "before everything changes." Glenna listened. She always had. They spoke about the children first, their growth, their differences, their strength. Glenna noticed the pride in his voice tempered by something else, regret unspoken but exact. "I never stopped thinking about who we were," he admitted finally, "or who we might have been if I'd made different choices sooner." Glenna didn't answer immediately. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "love doesn't disappear. It just waits for honesty." That was the night that passed, reclaimed its authority, not loudly, not recklessly, but decisively. What followed wasn't impulsive. It wasn't framed by fantasy or escape. It happened because truth, once acknowledged, demands responsibility. When Glenna later realized she was pregnant, clarity arrived before emotion. She counted weeks carefully, considered implications. Most importantly, she considered timing. Men will deserve truth, but truth delivered recklessly causes harm. She chose patience. The children noticed changes in her mood, not distress, but focus. Her daughter asked questions. Her son observed. When she told them, neither reacted with surprise. "That explains a lot," her daughter said. Their son nodded once. "You're calm, because this was a decision," Glenna replied, "not a mistake." They accepted it in the same way they'd accepted most truths in their lives, with understanding rather than drama. The wedding day arrived without ceremony inside Glenna, just preparation. The twins dressed carefully. Her son adjusted his jacket precisely. Her daughter smoothed her dress with intention. They sat together at the venue, close enough to feel each other's weight shift. Then the music started, and the world narrowed. They didn't name what followed that evening. Not at first. After their meeting, life resumed its regular rhythm on the surface. Work deadlines arrived, school schedules held. Manuel's wedding plans continued without visible disruption. Glenna returned to her routines with steady focus. But something had changed. It showed up in pauses that lasted longer than before, in messages that carried more care, fewer assumptions. In the way Manuel listened now, not to respond, not to redirect, but to absorb. He thought about Glenna often, not nostalgically, honestly. He replayed past conversations without trying to improve them. He let his own words sit as they had landed. He recognized what he had dismissed as temporary, what he had postponed without awareness. It became clear that nothing meaningful between them had ended because it faded. It had ended because it was crowded out. That distinction began to matter. Glenna felt it too, but differently. She wasn't waiting for something to return. She was watching to see if it had ever truly left. Memory didn't rush her. Emotion didn't overwhelm. This wasn't longing, it was recognition. They spoke again, briefly, then longer, sometimes about the children, sometimes about nothing that needed conclusion. The ease between them remained intact. It was not the ease of novelty, it was familiarity that had never turned careless. One evening, Manuel asked a question he hadn't asked before. "Did you ever regret leaving?" Glenna didn't answer immediately. "Regret isn't the right word," she said. "I understood the cost of staying." He nodded, not defensively, not with argument. He absorbed it. "I thought love would wait for me," he said quietly. "I didn't realize it required participation." That honesty mattered more to Glenna than apology ever could. They didn't speak about the pregnancy, not because it hovered unspoken between them, but because Glenna had already decided when truth would be placed. She was deliberate with life-altering facts. Manuel, for his part, sensed restraint but didn't push against it. He had learned, finally, that urgency without permission was intrusion. As the wedding approached, the contrast sharpened. Manuel's fiancée was gracious, composed, admired by those around her. Everything about the arrangement seemed correct, efficient, designed to function rather than deepen. And that realization unsettled him. He wasn't unhappy, but he was disconnected. And for the first time, that difference registered clearly. Glenna noticed it too, though she refused to claim responsibility for his awareness. She didn't interpret his discomfort as invitation. She didn't reframe it as opportunity. If anything, it reinforced how careful truth needed to be handled. They met once more before the ceremony, not privately this time, public enough to prevent misinterpretation, quiet enough to speak fully. Manuel arrived first. When Glenna joined him, there was no confusion in his expression, only familiarity. "I don't expect anything," he said early in the conversation. "I just needed to say this without noise." She listened. "I let success become permission," he continued, "to delay life, to simplify people, to trust that feelings could be stored until convenient." He paused, weighing his next words. "You didn't disappear because love failed," he said. "You left because I treated it like an option." Glenna met his gaze. Calm, steady. "Real love isn't fragile," she replied, "but it requires alignment. Without it, it teaches through distance." Neither spoke for a moment. Whatever existed between them was not rekindling. It was clarity. That clarity carried weight. In the days that followed, Glenna paid closer attention to her own condition. Not from concern, she felt well, but from responsibility. Timing mattered more than comfort now. Her children noticed her focus shift. Her daughter raised the subject directly. "When were you going to tell him?" "When it mattered," Glenna answered. Her son considered that. "Does it always matter?" "Yes," Glenna said, "but it doesn't always belong to everyone at the same time." Neither child questioned that logic. They trusted her judgment because she had never delivered truth carelessly. The wedding day arrived without lightning or dread. Glenna prepared in silence, not solemn, prepared. The children dressed with intention, understanding they were entering a space charged with significance, not spectacle. Manuel stood at the altar, aware of the weight pressing beneath ceremony. He had rehearsed the words required of him, but his thoughts strayed beyond them. Not forward, backward, not with yearning. Assessment. What had stayed, what had changed, what still demanded accountability. When Glenna entered the room, her presence registered immediately, even to herself. Not because of attention, but because alignment had pulled her into full awareness. Her son adjusted his stance beside her. Her daughter watched the altar steadily. Then Manuel looked up. The recognition was immediate, muted, but exact. It was not surprise that crossed his face. It was understanding, a knowing that arrived fully formed, without explanation. Nothing needed to be said yet, but everything had already been set in motion. Glenna knew before the confirmation strip dried, not because she expected it, but because her body had already made space for certainty. She didn't sit down right away. She stood at the bathroom sink, hands resting lightly on the edge, breathing steady. There was no shock, no rush of emotion, just quiet acknowledgement that life had changed shape again. She checked the date, then the calendar, then her memory. The timeline was precise. There was no ambiguity, no confusion, no room for doubt. That mattered to her. When people thought of secrets, they imagined fear or avoidance. Glenna felt neither. What she carried wasn't hidden. It was waiting. Waiting for the moment when truth could be placed without causing unnecessary harm. She had learned that honesty, like responsibility, required judgment. She didn't tell Manuel immediately. Not because she doubted his right to know, but because she respected the gravity of the moment. He was standing at the edge of a commitment that involved others. A truth this large could not be delivered as an eruption. It needed context and accountability. She went about her days as usual. Work, meetings, school schedules. Nothing in her routines confessed what was coming, but she moved with an added precision, aware that every decision now reached further than before. The children noticed first. Her son watched her more closely than usual. He didn't ask questions. He never did when answers needed time. He waited. Her daughter, less patient, studied her expression one evening and tilted her head. "You're thinking carefully," she said. Glenna smiled slightly. "I am, about us, about all of us." That seemed to satisfy her for the moment. When Glenna finally spoke to them, she did so without ceremony. No dramatic framing, no warning. "There's something you need to know," she said at the kitchen table, her voice even. "Our family is changing again." Her daughter's eyes widened. Her son's posture shifted. "What kind of changing?" her daughter asked. "I'm pregnant." Silence followed, not confusion, not disbelief. Processing. Her son spoke first. "Is it planned?" "Yes," Glenna said, "and it came with responsibility." Her daughter blinked once. "Does Dad know?" "Not yet." They exchanged a glance, one of those quiet moments that passed wordlessly between them. "When will you tell him?" her daughter asked. "When I can do it without damaging someone else's life unnecessarily," Glenna replied. Her son nodded slowly. "That makes sense." There was no panic in the room, no fear. This was how Glenna had raised them, to meet truth without collapse. The days leading up to the ceremony narrowed. Conversations with Manuel continued, but Glenna kept the boundary she had set. She didn't avoid him. She simply didn't cross the line she believed shouldn't be crossed privately. This wasn't just his child. It was a truth that would reshape multiple lives. She wouldn't deliver it casually. Manuel sensed distance, but he didn't misinterpret it. He had learned what restraint looked like in Glenna, and he didn't push against it now. Instead, his thoughts turned inward. He reviewed the years between them without rewriting them. He acknowledged both his successes and his absences. The approaching ceremony felt heavier than expected, not because of doubt, but because clarity had arrived too late to simplify anything. He was prepared to move forward. He was not prepared to be dishonest. That difference mattered. On the morning of the wedding, Glenna woke before her alarm. Not anxious, alert. She moved through preparation efficiently, checking details, making sure the children were ready, steadying herself internally without rehearsal. This was not a confrontation she needed to prepare emotionally. It was an appointment with truth. Her daughter studied herself in the mirror longer than necessary. "You okay?" Glenna asked. Her daughter nodded. "I was thinking about how people think moments like today are about celebration, but sometimes they're about learning." Glenna met her eyes in the reflection. "That's a good observation." Her son adjusted his jacket precisely, tugging at the sleeve until it fell exactly where he wanted it. "They're not expecting this," he said quietly. "No," Glenna agreed. "They aren't." The venue was already full when they arrived. Music flowed smoothly. Guests spoke with comfortable anticipation. There was no disorder, only expectancy. Glenna felt the weight of it the moment she stepped inside. Not pressure, awareness. She didn't look for Manuel at first. She waited until stillness settled. Then the ceremony began. The officiant spoke. Words about partnership and devotion filled the air. Guests listened, softened by ritual. Glenna's attention narrowed. Her breathing stayed calm. Her posture didn't shift, but something else aligned within her, an internal readiness. This was it. Not the exposure she feared, but the responsibility she had accepted. She trusted her children, and more importantly, they trusted her. Truth had reached its moment, and when it spoke, it would do so clearly. The ceremony reached its center with practiced ease. The officiant's voice carried calmly through the venue, measured and reassuring. Heads nodded at familiar phrases. Smiles appeared in the right places. It was the kind of moment designed to feel complete before it ended. Glenna sat still. Her son's hand remained steady in hers. Her daughter mirrored her posture, shoulders straight, eyes forward. Neither fidgeted, neither whispered. They understood what this moment required. Manuel stood at the altar, attention fixed ahead, posture flawless. He looked composed, exactly as the room expected him to look. Only those who knew him well could have seen the subtle tension held behind his stillness. The officiant paused briefly, allowing a quiet breath to settle the room. That pause changed everything. Glenna felt it before anyone else reacted. Not anticipation, alignment. The sense that the moment she had measured carefully now required action. Her son glanced at her, searching her expression. She met his eyes once. That was all he needed. Her daughter shifted in her seat, grounding herself before standing. Together, they rose. The movement wasn't dramatic. It didn't draw immediate attention. People noticed only after curiosity replaced ceremony. Whispers followed. The officiant stopped speaking. Manuel turned. For a fraction of a second, his face held confusion. Then awareness replaced it, quickly, unmistakably. His gaze found Glenna's. He didn't look away. Her son spoke first. "Our father built his life around leadership," he said clearly, voice steady. "He taught us that truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable." The room fell silent, not tense, but alert. Her daughter stepped forward slightly, her tone warm but firm. "He also taught us that love requires responsibility, not just intention." Eyes moved between them. Some guests leaned forward, others remained frozen, sensing the moment without understanding it. Glenna remained still, allowing her children to speak without interruption. This was not avoidance, it was trust. Her son continued, We were raised to believe that honesty doesn't belong to convenience, it belongs to timing. Then her daughter delivered the truth with care. Our family is growing, she said. Our mother is expecting. The words landed cleanly, not loudly, not violently, with precision. A ripple moved through the room, breath caught, a chair shifted, murmurs spread before settling again. Manuel didn't move. His eyes stayed on Glenna. The officiant stepped back instinctively, understanding that ceremony had been interrupted by reality. No one objected, no one rushed to restore order. Manuel walked toward Glenna, not quickly, not slowly, deliberately. He stopped in front of her. "You're pregnant?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. "Yes." A pause. Then the question that mattered. "Is the child mine?" "Yes." Something shifted in his expression, not panic, not shock, recognition. Understanding moved across his face in stages. Responsibility followed immediately behind it. He stepped back, exhaled once, then addressed the room without rehearsal. "I need a moment," he said evenly. No one argued. He turned to Glenna again. "May we speak?" She nodded. They moved to the side, not hidden but given space. The children remained standing composed. Guests watched, unsure of what they were witnessing, but certain it would not be fabricated. "I didn't know," Manuel said softly. "I didn't tell you yet," Glenna replied, "because it deserved context." He nodded. "It does." He looked toward the altar briefly, then back to her. "You understood the impact before anyone else," he said. "That hasn't changed." "This isn't about disruption," Glenna said. "It's about responsibility." Manuel took another breath. Whatever choices remained ahead would require ownership. He understood that fully now. He returned to the center of the room. "The ceremony can't continue as planned," he said calmly. "Not without honesty." No one protested. Some truths, once spoken, suspend performance. The twins returned to their seats. Glenna followed, posture unchanged. She felt no relief, only clarity. The wedding had not collapsed. It had paused, held in place by truth demanding space, and every person present understood that something rare had happened. Not scandal, accountability, and nothing would proceed without it. The room did not collapse into chaos. That surprised many people. Instead, it settled into something heavier, attention. Guests remained seated, unsure whether to speak or remain still. Conversations did not restart. Phones stayed untouched. No one rushed to leave. This was no longer a ceremony interrupted. It had become a moment requiring witness. Manuel stood apart from the altar now, without the formal distance of the setting. He looked less like a figure and more like a man asked to answer something immediately and fully. He addressed the guests again, not as a host, not as a groom, but as himself. "There are moments when leadership requires pause," he said evenly. "This is one of them." No explanation followed. None was owed to the room yet. He looked toward his fiancée. She met his gaze with restraint rather than reaction. Whatever bond existed between them had been built on displayed success. Now it faced an unscripted truth. "I need to acknowledge what was shared," Manuel continued, "and I need to do that responsibly." He turned back to Glenna. "You gave this the respect it required," he said quietly. "I wish I had done the same earlier." There was no public apology, no emotional display meant to soften observation. He did not ask for understanding. He accepted accountability. That distinction mattered. Glenna responded with the same composure she had carried all day. "This isn't about the past," she said. "It's about what happens next." He nodded. The officiant approached gently, not to reclaim control but to offer support. Manuel shook his head once. The language of ceremony no longer applied. The twins remained beside their mother, calm and unwavering. Their son watched the room carefully, measuring reactions. Their daughter tracked faces, reading what people rarely expressed openly. Neither appeared shaken. They had delivered truth without aggression and trusted it to stand on its own merit. Manuel turned again to the guests. "I'm asking for time," he said. Out of respect for everyone involved, no one objected. No one demanded resolution. The gravity of honest pause outweighed expectation. People began to rise slowly, not in confusion but understanding. The ceremony ended without closure because life had stepped in ahead of schedule. Outside, the air felt different. Not lighter, clearer. Manuel found Glenna a moment later, not urgently, deliberately. "I won't pretend this doesn't change things," he said. "I don't need you to pretend," she replied. "I need you to decide." She wasn't demanding a future. She was protecting alignment. You never used the children as leverage, he said softly. Not once. That was never their responsibility, she replied. And this child? He asked. This child deserves honesty, Glenna said. Nothing more, nothing less. Manuel nodded slowly. I won't disappear, he said, and I won't rush. That's the correct place to start, she answered. They parted without resolution because resolution requires time. Inside, conversations resumed in fragments. Speculation followed curiosity, but no one could accuse the moment of carelessness. It had been measured, grounded. Manuel's fiancée exited quietly. There were no scenes, only consequence. The twins noticed everything. You didn't raise your voice, she observed. No, Glenna agreed. You let truth speak instead, their son added. Yes, Glenna said. Neither asked if it was over. Neither asked what would change. They trusted that outcomes would follow integrity. For the first time in a long while, he understood that restraint was not indecision. It was respect. That night he sat alone and confronted the question he had postponed for years. What kind of man remains when performance ends? He understood now that wealth did not excuse delay, that family did not wait for readiness, that honesty, once postponed too long, reintroduces itself on its own terms. And yet, this revelation did not feel like punishment. It felt like correction. The day had not humiliated him. It had instructed him. And for the first time, Manuel Reichert listened without defense. Life did not reorganize itself overnight. Truth rarely works that way. In the weeks that followed, the wedding, silence replaced speculation. Public interest dulled quickly. Attention always moves on, but privately, things shifted with intention. Decisions were made carefully, away from microphones and crowded rooms. Glenna returned to her routines. Mornings still began early. The children still left for school with packed lunches and quiet confidence. Stability remained uninterrupted, not because nothing had changed, but because she refused to let change become chaos. Manuel did not disappear. He called when he said he would. He asked questions and waited for answers. He didn't make promises he wasn't prepared to keep. For the first time, his presence didn't arrive with conditions attached. That alone marked the difference. Their son noticed it first. He sounds different, he observed one evening after a phone call had ended. How so? Glenna asked. He listens until the end. She smiled slightly. That's new. Their daughter noticed something else. He's not explaining himself as much, she said. He's just being clear. That takes effort, Glenna replied. Manuel approached the future without assumptions. He asked what participation looked like instead of designing it himself. He understood that accountability didn't begin with apology. It began with consistency. There were conversations that needed space, legal ones, personal ones, conversations that respected more than one life at once. They didn't rush them. There was no storybook reunion, no dramatic reconciliation shaped for approval. What formed instead was alignment. Manuel accepted responsibility fully, not loudly, not performatively. He acknowledged the child she was carrying without reframing the narrative. He asked Glenna how she wished to proceed, and when she answered, he supported the plan as it was, not as he might have preferred. That mattered more than words ever could. The twins adjusted without difficulty. They were not confused. They had been raised on honesty, not illusion. Their son asked one final question one afternoon as Glenna prepared dinner. Do people ever get things right the first time? She paused. Sometimes, she said, but they don't learn as much when they do. Their daughter nodded, satisfied. I think learning lasts longer anyway. That felt true. Months passed. Glenna grew visibly tired before she grew visibly round. The change was gradual, natural, unhidden. She did not protect it from sight, the same way she had not protected truth from timing. Manuel attended appointments when invited. He didn't assume entitlement. He earned trust without requesting reassurance. When he spoke about the future, he framed it around presence, not control. He learned. That was the lesson. Not redemption, not reclamation, learning. Glenna never framed herself as strong publicly. She didn't need to. Strength had revealed itself through choice, patience, and clarity. She had never sought to disrupt a life. She had sought alignment with truth. And the difference between those two intentions reshaped everything. Life, in return, did not reward her with ease. It rewarded her with integrity. The baby arrived quietly, without attention. A healthy cry filled the room. Glenna held her child without spectacle, grounded in gratitude rather than relief. Manuel stood nearby, not hovering, not absent, present in a way that felt earned. The twins stood together at the foot of the bed. "She looks calm," their daughter said. "She looks brave," their son added. Glenna smiled. She's surrounded by honesty. That was the inheritance she wanted to pass on. Their family did not resemble convention. It resembled accountability. And that proved to be more durable. Years later, people would recall the wedding not as an interruption, but as a moment when truth was handled with maturity rather than force, not as drama, but as clarity delivered without cruelty. Glenna Walsh was not remembered for the timing of her truth. She was remembered for her restraint long before it, for teaching her children that silence is not weakness, that timing is not deception, and that grace does not require disappearance. Sometimes love waits because it is unfinished. Sometimes it returns because it was never discarded. And sometimes the most powerful choice a person makes is refusing to lie, out loud or quietly, to preserve comfort. Life does not reward perfection. It responds to honesty. And when truth is spoken with care, it does not destroy futures. It reshapes them. If this story made you reflect on truth, timing, or the choices we make for the people we love, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you value stories like this, subscribe